Chapter 5. Mama Bear. She did the best she could. That's it. All the years of being upset and disappointed by my mother and the choices she made came down to one truth. My mom did the best she could with what she had, and that truth has set me free. For many years I struggled with understanding her, and I wanted some answers with regard to the tough times we experienced in our childhood. But the answers never came. Mom couldn't handle talking about the decisions she'd made in the past and how they impacted us and how we still carry them around. I tried to get her to talk with me many times, but she would just shut down. She couldn't bear the thought that she had disappointed us or let us down. So for the last number of years she acted as if it never happened, and that would drive me crazy. But in time I realized that it was probably a self-preservation thing. She knew. She knew her mistakes and failures far better than we did, and she had to wake up and carry them with her every day of her life. The weight was already heavy enough on her, I think. Having to face trial for it was just too much. So I learned to let it go, to just enjoy her for who she was and who she was trying to be, and that made all the difference in the final years. I loved my mom. I always loved her because she was my mother, but I loved her differently in the end. I was proud of her when the cancer finally took her from us, really proud of her. I think it's hard to be proud of someone if you're angry with them. The bad emotions have a way of canceling out the good ones. So in the end, when I let the bad memories go, it made room for us to make beautiful new memories. That was hard for me to learn to do, but I did. My mom, Rita Ruth Carnahan, was from a large Irish Catholic family in Michigan. Her father, Leo, was a hard man. He had been in the big war back in the early 40s, and when he came home, he had a dozen children with his wife, Maddie. I never met my mother's mother. She died from brain cancer before I was born, but I'm told that she was a saint by everyone. I've never heard a bad word spoken about her, which is a big deal, especially coming from a family who has a gift for talking about the worst in people. My grandmother, Maddie, was a writer. I'm told she had poems published in local papers and that her writing still fills shoeboxes and closets somewhere at my great-aunt's houses. I was once given a story of hers that I still have, typed beautifully. It's about a family trip Mom, her, siblings, and parents took from Michigan to California in 1956, stopping in Chicago, then Kansas, and continuing clear across Route 66 until they reached and saw the blue water of the ocean for the first time. It was beautifully written and filled with wonderful details, clearly written by a mother with passion to capture the moments that mattered in her life and to save them for eternity. I can relate to that. My mom was difficult, I think. She had her own mind and wasn't afraid to use it. That was unacceptable to my grandfather. They butted heads early on and never stopped until he was gone. My guess is she had some unresolved questions for her father, just like I had for her. By 16, she was on her own, living with her newly married brother Rod and his wife, Mary, a routine that would repeat itself well into my teenage years. Mom had been married and divorced and remarried by the time I came along. Her first husband's name was Joe, and he was tough on her, tougher than my dad was, I think. Joe beat her and left her stranded in California with a son in diapers who bore his name and another one on the way that he wouldn't meet until years later. Mom somehow found her way to Kansas and was waiting tables when she met my father, Robert. Tall and handsome, he played guitar and dreamed of singing at the Grand Ole Opry someday. He was a ladies' man. Unfortunately, not a one-lady man. That would cause problems in the future, but for a while it was good. Mom was pregnant when they met and they fell in love, and soon after my brother Blaine was born, she found herself pregnant again, this time with me. I was skinny with some red in my blonde hair and a face full of freckles. My dad loved me. I know he did. He made it clear. He let me sit on his lap. That may not seem like a big deal, and it wasn't to me at the time, but it was to some of the other kids in the house. I didn't realize until years later that my two older brothers weren't allowed on his lap. My dad accepted them and provided for them, but didn't treat them the same way he treated me or my two sisters who came later. He let them and everyone around know which children were his and which weren't, which kids he loved most. How he didn't know that would scar those boys for life, I have no idea. But it seems he didn't, or he didn't care. My two older brothers are in their 50s now, and both have very difficult lives. I'm very proud of them and the men they become in spite of their struggles. We look alike in some ways, blondish hair, fair skin, but there's a hurt in their eyes that you won't find in mine. There's a pain that is so deep in them, no amount of time or drugs or rehab ever touches it. Though things come and go, but the hurt remains. Why my mom didn't set him straight, I don't know either. It was a different time, the late 60s and early 70s. Women were supposed to know their place, I guess, and so were stepkids. As a grown man, I can't bear to see people get hurt who don't deserve it, especially children. If I could go back to that time when I was 4 or 5 years old, I'd climb off my dad's lap, push one of my brothers up there, and I wouldn't ask him if it was okay. I'd just stand there and dare him to say something. I'd like to think I'm that kind of man now, but as a child, I didn't even realize it was happening. I never saw it. I didn't want to, I guess. My father's rejection of my brothers didn't show itself like that. It showed itself through their failed marriages, prison sentences, and stints in halfway houses, and painkillers, always painkillers. Even today, the doctors keep writing prescriptions for my two older brothers, but they can't touch their kind of pain. Medicine can't fix being rejected by a father. Only a time machine can unlock that door, or an apology. And my father selfishly took that key with him to his grave. My mom tried to right the wrong over the years, but something tells me she needed an apology from her own father before she could see clearly to help her sons. I like to tell you things got easier for my mom, but they didn't. Trouble and hard times seemed to have found their way into our black trash bag luggage, and we carried them with us to all the new places we lived. She always struggled to make a living, to find love, to be happy. But there were good times too. She was proud of her children and believed that we were all destined for great things. It wasn't unusual for me and Joey to be at Mom's house the day after we had received an accolade at an award show or an event, and Mom would spend the whole time telling us how good my brother was doing, selling his homeless newspapers on the corner, or how my other brother was filing a lawsuit against his employers and would hopefully getting a settlement soon. It's not that she wanted to hold me down. My mom just wanted to lift them up. She loved all her children the same, and she went out of her way to let me and everyone around her know. Funny, that was just the opposite of what my father did. Most of my memories growing up have to do with the tough times Mom went through, that we went through with her. Like the time when we were starving, living in a rundown government apartment complex in Kansas, and she had to break down and call my dad for help, asking him to pay just 1 month of the years of child support that he had managed never to pay. That call was hard for her to make. She didn't want to beg, but in this case it meant the difference between her kids going hungry or not. Next thing I knew, we were loading a car and headed to Kansas City to meet up with my dad. When we pulled into the big empty parking lot at the Kansas City International Airport that evening, Dad's car was already there. My brothers and sisters and I were excited to see him. Rolling down our windows and waving, big smiles on our faces as Mom's car pulled next to his, he just sat there in his long burgundy Buick smoking a Winston. I don't think he even turned his head to look. Pissed, I'm sure, that Mom had put him on the spot. He took another drag and kept staring into the distance, ignoring the excited voices and little arms dangling from our car window. Finally, Mom opened her door and walked around to the driver's side of his car. Then my father managed to take a woman who was at her lowest and drop kick her to the curb. He rolled down his window a few inches, tossed $100 or so in small bills into the wind, and with that cigarette still hanging from his lip, slipped the Buick into drive and left my mother, with her babies watching, scrambling across the parking lot to pick up the cash. Anything that remained of her dignity was left there on that sun-baked pavement. And it wasn't just my father. Most men in general were not good to my mother. When I was in high school and we were living in Kentucky, Mom had a job cleaning a rich oil guy's house. She cleaned his toilets, washed his dishes, and did his laundry while God knows what his wealthy wife was doing with her time. Sometimes in the evenings, Mom had to cook dinner and serve the couple and their uppity friends. She never enjoyed that, but again, if that is how she could make a paycheck, she did what she had to do. But one evening in particular, I remember pulling in at their big fancy house to pick up Mom. She had been there late for another swanky dinner party they were throwing. Normally she came out tired and ready for her own beer and a cigarette, but on this night she came out with tears streaming down her face, sobbing. As we drove home, I asked her what was wrong, and she just sat there staring out the passenger door window. She sat there for a long time, thinking. Finally, she told me that she had been fired. She said at the end of the party she had gone to use the bathroom in the next room, and the rich man was listening from his seat at the table. He said he didn't hear the water running before my mom came back in the room, so he called her out in front of his friends. Said he couldn't have someone serve them who didn't have the manners to wash her hands after urinating. So he told her what a piece of crap she was and then fired her. I'm sure that wasn't the first time Mom had been fired from a job, but even she knew there was no reason to belittle her in front of other people and make her feel so small. Sometimes I think it's the folks with higher education who are the most ignorant. I should have gone aside and stood up for her, told that man to apologize to her. But I'm still only about 15 and my father's son. I'd yet to come across any role models to show me what good men do, so I just drove, listened, and kept my eyes on the road. Mom drowned her sorrows in Folgers coffee and Budweiser beer every day pretty much for as long as I knew her. Not together, of course. The coffee would take its shift from about 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. each day, then the beer would take over and get her through till sleep would come, and the process would start again. One would help her find courage to face another day, and the other would numb the nerves that were shot and the heart that was broken. Mom was probably what you'd call a functioning alcoholic. She would be disappointed to hear me say that, but I don't mean that in an AA sort of way. I mean it more in a descriptive sense. She just liked beer, and the alcohol seemed to help when nothing else would. I never once saw her stumbling drunk, but I saw a strange smile on her face some late evenings that you'd have a hard time finding during the day. It looked like happiness, contentment, or some form of it. The story of men hurting my mom didn't stop with husbands, strangers, or boyfriends. Her sons were some of the worst offenders, me included. One by one, each of us took our turns disappointing her with our choices in life. Sometimes they were in the form of bold-faced lies we told married women we slept with, or calls that came in the middle of the night saying, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Feek, but we've got your son in our jail." And sometimes they were worse things than that. Mom just took it all in stride, her kind of stride, that is, chain-smoking cigarettes and downing 12-ounce cups and cans. She had a stronger back than I did, that's for sure. With all the heartache that I've experienced, the weight on my shoulders has never been half the weight that was on hers. On one scorching hot afternoon in the summer of 2001, I remember sitting in Mom's trailer, whining about a tough day I was having. By that time, she was living just down the road from me in Tennessee in an RV parked on a lot near the interstate. The RV didn't run, which was perfect because Mom wasn't going anywhere. She knew it, too. Her life was at a dead end. Her 3-pack, 12-pack-a-day habits had stopped numbing her pain, and she was really feeling it. The emptiness had caught up to her once and for all, I think. Unfortunately, I didn't notice. I had found some success, had written a couple of hit songs that played on the radio, and was complaining about something or other in the music industry and how this or that wasn't fair. Mom just sat there in that 150-square-foot trailer smoking and listening. I was on a rant about my troubles when I looked up and saw a single tear rolling down her cheek. Like 30 years earlier, I asked, "What's wrong, Mom?" This time she wasn't talking about the rich guy in the fancy house. She was talking about me, the rich guy in the fancy farmhouse. And 60 years of never standing up for herself rolled off her tongue. "I'd give anything, just to live your life for one day." She stopped me dead in my tracks, and I knew what she meant. I wrote songs for a living. I was paid to be creative. My work was fun, and I was well compensated for it. She had just come off an all-night shift waiting tables at a truck stop on exit 69. Her arthritis and age made it impossible for her to keep up with the younger girls and the boss who was riding her back. Her tears started falling harder. I got up and put my arms around her, and I held my mother, for the first time, I think. And tears fell from my eyes, too. I held her and she cried, and she let the truth of her life and mine run down her cheeks and onto that dirty gray indoor-outdoor carpet. The only difference between me and you, Mom, is that I follow my dreams. I believe in something and move toward it, and somehow it comes to be. Don't you ever want to be something, Mom? And she went on to tell me about her dreams, about how she had always wanted to go to college and be a writer, how she loved to learn and wished that she had the chance to do something, be something more when she was younger, but it was too late now. She was too old. Mom and I talked a long time, then I got in my new truck and drove away thinking, it's a shame that she never gets a break. But then she did, I mean immediately. I called Mom a few days later and asked her what she was doing. Like a dozen times in my childhood, she said moving. I laughed and asked where. She told me that she was moving into a brick hut house in town, that she had driven to a local community college and asked if there was any way in the world a 60-year-old woman could enroll. It turned out there was. She was a displaced homemaker who'd raised 5 kids. She barely made any money, so she qualified for half a dozen grants and even government housing and a monthly check. The next time I saw Mom, we were moving her black trash bags into a pretty darn nice duplex in Columbia, Tennessee, the town closest to us. And at 60 years old, she drove herself to her first college class and sat with a 118-year-old freshman, amazed and excited at the new opportunity in front of her. 2 years later, all of us kids were there for her graduation. I've never seen a smile as big as her the day she walked across that stage and they handed her that diploma for her associate's degree. Never. Except maybe mine that day and my brothers and sisters. We were all so proud of her, but I think she was the most proud. She, more than all of us, knew what it meant for her to get there. She had done something that no one, especially her, believed she could. I'd like to think that I played a small part in that change in her life, a part that I am embarrassed by, but a part in her beautiful story just the same.